this subject is a very interesting subject, a fascinating subject, and I don't know whether, as Dr. Khan, Dr. Mrs. Khan, Janet Khan, has said, whether I'll make it interesting for you. It's a subject which engaged the Baha'i world during the latter years of the ministry of Shoghi Effendi. The word crusade was used by Shoghi Effendi as far back as 1939, as best as I can find out from my colleague here, Dr. Janet Khan, who has helped to research this one point for me. He used the word crusade, which, as you know, has historical connotations in connection with the military expeditions of the European Christians who came to the Holy Land in order to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. He used that term to denote a teaching plan. For example, when the first 7-year plan of the American believers was inaugurated, 2 years later, it was started in 1937. 2 years later, in 1939, he began to use the word crusade instead of plan. In his Persian writings, he used the word jihad, which is holy war. So we have a holy war and we have a holy year. But for the English-speaking world, he used the word crusade. And then subsequently, he used the word crusade also for the second 7-year plan and so on, and particularly, of course, for the 10-year plan. So it became known even more as the 10-year crusade than as a 10-year plan. And the pioneers, he sometimes referred to them as crusaders. Now, Shoghi Effendi did not give the Baha'i world any intimation about this crusade in the earlier years of his guardianship. But when he began to build up the World Center by inviting outstanding believers to come to the Holy Land to serve on the International Baha'i Council, or to come here as hands of the cause of God, which was in 1951, 6 years before he passed away. At that time, he started referring to something very great that was going to happen. And I'll tell you in what terms he was referring to these events. For example, I have given you some dates here of messages that he sent to the Baha'i world between 1951 and 1953. Now, 1953 was the inception of the 10-Year Crusade. But between those 2 years, he began making some giving some references to this event. For example, the very first one that I have been able to find, and I remember very well, I was in Tehran at that time, and there was, when this message of Shoghi Effendi came, there was a lot of discussion among the scholars of the faith in Tehran about the implications of what exactly Shoghi Effendi had in mind. It was February 1951, 25th of February. This is the first dawn of this idea. It is in a letter that he wrote to the British National Spiritual Assembly, and almost on the same day, he sent a cable to the American National Spiritual Assembly, almost repeating word for word what he had told the British Baha'is. As the letter to the British Baha'i community is not in Kabylese and is more easily understood, I will read you that. On the success of this enterprise, now what is he referring to? He had instructed the British Baha'i community to have a 2-year plan, beginning 1951 and ending 1953. Those of you who are members of the British Baha'i community and are old enough will remember this 2-year plan of the British Baha'i community. Foremost among these Baha'is is Mr. Semple here, who was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the British Isles in those days. So he gave the National Assembly of the British Isles a 2-year plan. This 2-year plan was intended to send pioneers to Africa. So he said, on the success of this enterprise, that means by 1953, unprecedented in its scope, unique in its character, he's talking about the 2-year plan, and immense in its spiritual potentialities, must depend the initiation at a later period in the formative age of the faith of undertakings. Now this is a hint by Shoghi Effendi about the 10-Year Crusade. The first hint of undertakings embracing within their range all national assemblies. You see, under the 2-year plan, Shoghi Effendi had instructed only 5 national assemblies to work together. 5. In order to open Africa south of the Sahara. And he put all these national assemblies under the sort of direction of the British National Spiritual Assembly. The coordinating body of these 5 NSAs was the British National Spiritual Assembly. Now he says, at the end of the 2-year plan, we're going to have undertakings which will involve and engage all national spiritual assemblies, not just 5. All national assemblies functioning throughout the Baha'i world, undertakings constituting in themselves a prelude to the launching of worldwide enterprises destined to be embarked upon in future epochs of that same age, the formative age, by the Universal House of Justice. So you see, he gives us a foreshadowing of 2 stages. One, a period when there will be undertakings involving all national spiritual assemblies, which was the 10-Year Crusade. It did involve all national spiritual assemblies. Following that, there will be, throughout epochs of the formative age, enterprises which will be embarked upon by the Universal House of Justice that will symbolize the unity and coordinate and unify the activities of these national assemblies. I remember the discussion in Tehran by the scholars of the faith as to why Shoghi Effendi is saying here that those enterprises would be embarked upon by the Universal House of Justice. There was a lot of discussion in Tehran about this at that time. Why didn't he say under the aegis of the guardianship? You see, that was the question in the minds of the friends. Remember, this is 1951, 6 years before he passed away. You see, and there was this thing. So you see, in this one short paragraph, Shoghi Effendi is telling us about the future in 2 ways. One is that something great is going to happen, yet something else after that is going to happen under the aegis of the Universal House of Justice. Then there came the other one, 30th November 1951, which is 9 months later. And then that's the time when he had just written the American Baha'i community in a letter written on his behalf by his secretary, in which for the first time Shoghi Effendi used the term holy year. That was just 1 week before the 30th of November 1951. And he explained in that letter that the holy year is to mark the year 9. The year 9 is a reference to the Bab's prophecy that in the year 9, that means 9 years after 1844, his own declaration, the promised one will come. The new revelation will be born. So the year 9 is a reference to that. And in order to mark that year, he said that will be a holy year. And the year 9 began, as you will see later on in another chart, from the time when Baha'u'llah received the intimation of his revelation in the Siyah Chal of Tehran. He entered the Siyah Chal in August of 1852 and stayed in the Siyah Chal for 4 months. And Shoghi Effendi wrote and explained that this intimation, this dream or experience, mystic experience that Baha'u'llah writes about in his writings about receiving this revelation, occurred at a midway point of this period of 4 years. So from, if you like, August, 4 months, August, September, October. He entered in 15th of August, so he took the date 15th of October as the beginning of the holy year. That's how he calculated it. And that was the holy year, and as I told you, he had explained it. Now on this message of 30th of November, this is what he said. He has, in a message, he explained that we're going to have intercontinental conferences for the first time. We've always had national conferences. Now he said we are entering a new stage. We're going to have intercontinental conferences. You can imagine how excited the Baha'is were at that time to hear these terms and these concepts from the Guardian. Forthcoming celebrations must be signalized through inauguration, long anticipated intercontinental stage in administrative evolution of our faith, marking its gradual development through successive phases of local, regional, national, international Baha'i activity. Initiation, this highly significant measure, further cementing Baha'i national assemblies in 5 continents of the globe, will be acclaimed by posterity as counterpart to consolidation faith at its world center through recent formation International Baha'i Council in the Holy Land. So you see, he gave another hint there that we're going to have an international collaboration of all national assemblies very soon. So that was 1950. Then, soon after that, he, just before Rizwan, he announced, in March, he announced that the 11 national spiritual assemblies of the Baha'i world at that time will soon be joined by a 12th national spiritual assembly. And that was the Italo-Swiss National Assembly. And he praised that the work of Dr. Jukhari in that cable, and said how important it was that at the beginning of this new phase, this global, international phase, we now have a new National Spiritual Assembly. So that instead of 11 National Assemblies, we were to have 12 National Spiritual Assemblies to launch the 10-year plan. And these are the words he used. Anticipate entrusting to the youngest among the 12 National Assemblies of the Baha'i world a specific plan, enabling it, in conjunction with its sister National Spiritual Assemblies of the Baha'i world, to promote in the course of the 10 years, that was the first intimation, of the 10 years separating the second from the most great jubilee, the global crusade designed to hoist the standard of Baha'u'llah and the remaining states, dependencies, and islands of the whole planet. I have to hurry up a little. So the next one was in June 1952, and this was a heart-rending message from Shoghi. No matter how long, the period that separates them, means the believers, from ultimate victory, however arduous the task, however formidable the exertions demanded of them. And he goes on saying, however this, however that, however that. One of them is, however grievous the ordeal of temporary separation from the heart and nerve center of their faith, which future unforeseeable disturbances may impose upon them, then I adjure them by the precious blood that flowed in such great profusion, by the lives of the unnumbered saints and heroes who were immolated, by the supreme, the glorious sacrifice of the Prophet Herald of our faith, by the tribulations which its founder himself willingly underwent, so that his cause might live, his order might redeem a shattered world, and its glory might suffuse the entire planet. I adjure them, as this solemn hour draws nigh, to resolve never to flinch, never to hesitate, never to relax, until each and every objective in the plans to be proclaimed at a later date has been fully consummated. That shook the Baha'i world. The Baha'i world realized that while there was a wonderful thing happening, you're going to have plans. Each of these 12 national assemblies will have its own plan, just like the Italo-Swiss will have its own plan. But we're going to have some rough times ahead. And then came the auspicious moment in October 1952, 8th of October 1952, when he announced the summary of the 10-year crusade. Now remember, we are not yet in 53. We're still in October 52. But already in October 52, he gave us the objectives. But I won't go into the objectives now, but I want just to read to you the preamble to the objectives. Feel our propitious to proclaim to the entire Baha'i world the projected launching on the occasion of the convocation of the approaching intercontinental conferences on the 4 continents of the globe, the fate-laden, soul-stirring, decade-long, world-encircling spiritual crusade, involving the simultaneous initiation of 12 national 10-year plans and the concerted participation of all national spiritual assemblies of the Baha'i world, aiming at the immediate extension of Baha'u'llah's spiritual dominion as well as the eventual establishment of the structure of his administrative order in all remaining sovereign states, principal dependencies comprising principalities, sultanates, emirates, sheikhdoms, protectorates, trust territories, and crown colonies. You can imagine how excited the Baha'i world was to read these. Scattered over the surface of the entire planet, the entire body of the avowed supporters of Baha'u'llah's all-conquering faith are now summoned to achieve in a single decade feats eclipsing in totality the achievements which in the course of the 11 preceding decades illuminated the annals of Baha'i pioneering. Then he went on giving the summary of these goals. Now, in May 1953, he had already announced not only the summary, but the detailed ones. The intercontinental conferences were held. To each one he sent a special message, enumerated all the goals pertaining to that continent, sent hands of the cause there to be present, with a special hand representing him personally, and all the continents. All this happened during that holy year. It began in February of 1953 and ended in October 1953. It began in Kampala, Uganda, then in Wilmette, then in Europe, then in New Delhi. And at the time, by mid-October, which was the end of the holy year, he had delivered his message. Now, on the 4th of May, which is 2 years after Rizwan of that year that he had completed his announcement, see what he says. That message of Shoghi Effendi was another thunderbolt. Truly. We should have lived in those days to see what effect these words of Shoghi Effendi had on the Baha'i world. In a message to the American conference that Rohia Khanum read on his behalf. It's a long message. And then, towards the end of it, he goes into a review of the spiritual evolution of humanity. And he says that this process, this stupendous, vast process, consists of 10 parts. And then he enumerated part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. You know what was part 1? All the prophets of God before the Bab. Part 1. And then part 2 began with the Bab. And then he enumerated the various stages until he comes to, I can't read you the whole message, it's a long one. So you'll have to read these things for yourself. These are the dates there. Then he comes to the 8th part, which is his own ministry. Up to 1953, he stops. From 1921 till 1953. Okay? And then he says, the 9th part. What is the 9th part? I'll read it to you. The 9th part of this process, the stage we are now entering, is the further diffusion of that same light over 131 additional territories and islands in both the eastern and western hemispheres through the operation of a decade-long world spiritual crusade, whose termination will, God willing, coincide with the most great jubilee commemorating the centenary of the declaration of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. That was the 9th part. The 10th part is everything we're doing till the end of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, believe it or not. And that's how he describes it. The 10th part, where are we? And finally, the 10th part of this mighty process must be the penetration of that light in the course of numerous crusades and of successive epochs, of both the formative and golden ages of the faith, into all the remaining territories of the globe through the erection of the entire machinery of Baha'u'llah's administrative order, in all territories, both East and West, the stage at which the light of God's triumphant faith, shining in all its power and glory, will have suffused and enveloped the entire planet. And then he goes on to talk about the civilization which will then be born. The entire range of the Baha'i dispensation. We are in the 10th part. The 9th part, only 10 years. Which 10 years? The 10-Year Crusade. Can you believe it? In this stupendous universal process of spiritual evolution of humanity was this stage. All right. Are you tired? Just flipped one chart. Okay. Now, I'm giving you some few things just as a background because I see some of you are young. Thank God. And this is just to give you the background to some of the events of those years in order for you to realize how the Baha'i world felt when this tremendous announcement was made. You see, the American Baha'is, Shoghi Effendi named the United States and Canada as the cradle of the administrative order. There was one National Assembly there, the recipients of the divine plan of Abdul Baha. So everything began with the American Baha'i community. For 16 years, he said, from 1921 till 1937, he had to build up the administrative order in the cradle of the faith, in the cradle of the administration of the United States. Then in 1937, Rizwan, he gave them this first 7-year plan. The Baha'i world until 1937, from 1844, had never heard anything about plans. We knew about teaching, we knew about travel teaching, we knew about martyrdom, we knew about having local assemblies and having funds and things like that. Plans? What plans? So the first experience of the Baha'i world collectively to have a plan on a national level was this one, 1937 to 1944. We won't go into the details or the goals of it. Then he gave them, because they were very tired, he gave them 2 years respite. Now rest, it's okay. Then he gave them the second 7-year plan, from 1946 Rizwan to 1953. Now during this period, while the second 7-year plan was taking place in the United States, a very interesting thing developed. He urged other national assemblies, the other 10, because there were 11 at that time, say, now how about you having some teaching plans too? So he urged all the national assemblies to have plans. So that's why the second plan was paralleled by national plans executed by other NSAs in Asia, Africa, and Australasia. Now among these plans was the 2-year plan of the British NSA. They had before that a 6-year plan for their own internal goals, and now he gave them the 2-year plan. So all this was during that second 7-year plan. Then in his letters, he had referred to the third 7-year plan, after 3 years of respite. So that's how everybody expected that, well, the Americans have had 2 plans, they're going to have a third one. And then suddenly he decided that no 3 years respite. Immediately upon the end of the second 7-year plan, we're going to have the 10-year plan, not only for the United States and Canada, but for the entire Baha'i world, as you saw me reading from his messages. So that third 7-year plan was totally cancelled and was superseded by the 10-year plan. There was no third 7-year plan. Now, another thing that you must remember is that I just wanted you to realize this thing what Shoghi Effendi says, that the Baha'i world now has entered a new phase of international collaboration. So the first one was the 10-Year Crusade. Then the Shoghi Effendi at the midway point passed away. The hands of the cause took over. The 10-Year Crusade was completed. There was 1 year respite. The Universal House of Justice came into existence. They needed time. So they had 1 year to review the situation, so to speak, and come up, after consultation with the hands of the cause at that time, the 9-year plan, 1964-1973. Then, following Shoghi Effendi's style, we said, the House of Justice said, all right, 1 year respite. Then the 5-year plan came, 1974, 1979. Then the 7-year plan came, 1999, 1986. Then the recently terminated 6-year plan came, 1986, 1992. Then we are having the Holy Year from Rizwan, 1992 till 1993. And then we're going to have the 3-year plan, 1993, 1996. Now, what is going to happen then? Only Baha'u'llah knows. So you see, we're going pretty quickly now. Now, I want you to meditate on this passage from God Passes By. The first dawnings of that light of peerless splendor had broken in the city of Shiraz. The rim of that orb had now appeared above the horizon of the Siyah Chal of Tehran. Its rays were to burst forth a decade later in Baghdad, piercing the clouds which immediately after its rise in those somber surroundings obscured its splendor. It was destined to mount to its zenith in the faraway city of Adrianople, and ultimately to set in the immediate vicinity of the fortress town of Akka. So you see, in this brief sentence, or 2 sentences, 3 sentences, Shoghi Effendi is describing a process of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. He says what happened during the period of the Bab we should consider as the period of dawn. Now, as the sun appeared, the rim of the orb of the sun appeared, early morning, sunrise. That moment, he said, was the birth of the Baha'i revelation in the Siyah Chal of Tehran. That began the Holy Year, the first Holy Year. So now he describes the rise of the sun. See, the next stage he says, Baghdad, the declaration of Baha'u'llah's mission. It reached its zenith, its highest point, in Adrianople, when Baha'u'llah wrote his letters to the king, the proclamation of his faith. Then it began to set. It set in the city of Akka, in Baji, in 1992, the second Holy Year. The sunrise set fixed the time for the first Holy Year. The sunset fixed the time for the second Holy Year. That's how it is. So therefore, we have 2 Holy Years. We have the one announced by Shoghi Effendi, October 1952, October 53, during which the first 4 continental conferences were held, and we had the second one announced by the Universal House of Justice, Rizwan 92 to Rizwan 93, during which commemorative events will be held in the Holy Land in May 1992, and the Second World Congress in New York in November 1992. You are familiar with all these things. Now, we come to another subject that I thought would be important for your background, is to have a quick review of the centenaries that we have had so far. The centenaries during the formative age. The first centenary, and many of you in this room undoubtedly remember that, the centenary of the Declaration of the Bab, that was the first Jubilee, May 1944. The highlights were worldwide celebrations all over the Baha'i world. The second, announced by Shoghi Effendi, was the centenary of the martyrdom of the Bab, July 1950. And he called on all the Baha'i world to have commemorative events in honor of the Bab. The next centenary was the birth of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, which I have referred to several times tonight, which is the intimation of his mission, and was named by him as the Second Jubilee. And sometimes he referred to it as the Great Jubilee, during which the first holy year, October 52 to October 53, took place, and the highlights were the first 4 intercontinental conferences. I have also referred to that previously. The fourth centenary was the centenary of Baha'u'llah's declaration in April 1963, and it was the declaration of his mission. The third Jubilee, he called it, and in other writings he referred to it as the most great Jubilee. The one before it was the Great Jubilee, and this one he called the most great Jubilee, the centenary of Baha'u'llah's declaration. And the highlights were worldwide celebrations, particularly culminating in the World Congress, the first World Congress, which was held in London. Then next we had the centenary of the revelation of the Surah Muluk in Adrianople, where Shoghi Effendi said the sun had reached its zenith. September 1967. The highlights were the 6 intercontinental conferences, and this was embarked upon by the Universal House of Justice, and hands of the cause went to all these 6 intercontinental conferences. They went first to Adrianople, visited the House of Baha'u'llah in Adrianople, all 6 hands, and then scattered to the 6 parts of the world, carrying with them the portrait of Baha'u'llah, which was taken in Adrianople in 6 copies, and the friends in these conferences were privileged to view the portrait of Baha'u'llah. That was the number 6. Then the centenary of the ascension of Baha'u'llah, which is ahead of us, and the beginning of the holy year, April 1993, and the highlights you know very well. We have the events here and the events in New York. Now we come to the actual 10-year plan. Shoghi Effendi sent his manuscript of the 10-year plan to 2 national assemblies, to the United States and to the British Isles. And he asked both of them to publish his manuscript. This is the one that was published by the American National Spiritual Assembly. It is in 2 parts. It is called the Baha'i Faith 1844-1952, Information Statistical and Comparative. The first part is statistics of the Baha'i world, including supplement, 10-year International Baha'i Teaching and Consolidation Plan, 1953-1963, compiled by Shoghi Effendi, guardian of the Baha'i Faith. So, you open page 50, and from page 50 until page 74, you've got the details of the 10-Year Crusade, compiled by Shoghi Effendi himself. in full detail and in full splendor. Now, I put here for you merely a summary, and I will comment on some of the more important ones, or as any of these may need some comment. The first one is the adoption of preliminary measures. Shoghi Effendi was planning to build a superstructure for the shrine of Baha'u'llah, but this was not his intention. Many asked him questions and he answered. He said, what I had in mind was to cleanse the surroundings of the shrine, to create the Haram-e-Aqdas that you now see, where we sit for the feasts. So that was his intention, and he accomplished it. The second was the opening of 131 virgin territories. He named them. At that time, we had about the same number of territories opened. So by opening 131 new territories that he had named, it was equal to doubling the number of territories open to the faith. There were 41 countries in Africa, in Asia, 33 countries in Africa, 30 countries in Europe, 27 countries in America, in the Americas. But in the course of the evolution of the plan, a new territory was added to the 131, and they became 132. When we get to the chart outlining, giving the details about the Knights of Baha'u'llah, I will go into that point. But remember that I owe you this explanation about this extra territory which was added. The next one is the translation and publication of Baha'i literature in 91 additional languages. And Shoghi Effendi named all the languages himself. There were 40 in Asia, 31 in Africa, 10 in Europe, 10 in America, and he allocated the responsibility for translating and publishing these books and publications to different national spiritual assemblies. He didn't leave it open. He specified which NSA should translate and publish literature in which language. The next one was the Mashq al-Askars, construction of 2 houses of worship, one in Tehran and one in Frankfurt. Now, it so happened that the circumstances in Iran did not permit the construction of the temple in Tehran. So in his own lifetime, he decided that another temple should be built instead of the one in Tehran. And at that time, he announced that the Kampala temple in Uganda would replace the temple in Tehran as a goal. And a few months later, he added Sydney, Australia. So he really had 2 instead of 1. The next one is the acquisition of a site for the temple on Mount Carmel. He didn't have that temple site here, and it was Mrs. Collins who provided the funds. Shoghi Effendi was able to purchase this very precious and important property, which is blessed by the footsteps of Baha'u'llah himself, as you all know, at the time when he revealed the tablet of Carmel. The next one is the erection of the first dependency of the temple in Wilmette. That was to be the home for the aged, and this was completed. The next was the purchase of temple sites in 11 countries, and he named all of the countries where temple sites had to be acquired. There were 3 on the American continent, 3 in Africa, 2 in Asia, 2 in Europe, and 1 in Australasia. The next was the development of the functions of the institution of the hands of the cause of God. That became very important as the years went by during those 4 years that he was alive during the 10-year plan. He added more hands to the number he had already appointed. He called on them to appoint auxiliary boards of 9 for each continent. Then he told them that there should be 2 auxiliary boards instead of one for protection and one for the teaching of the faith. And then towards the end of his life, he added more hands of the cause, and he named the hands of the cause as chief stewards of the embryonic world commonwealth. So the institution of the hands developed very rapidly during those 4.5 years. The next is establishment of a Baha'i court in the Holy Land. Now, the establishment of a Baha'i court in the Holy Land has not yet taken place. Shoghi Effendi did not intend by this that there will be a court that will supervise national spiritual assemblies. No, the head of the faith was supervising and coordinating the work of national spiritual assemblies. What he had in mind was that as this is the world center, just as there are various religions here in Israel which have certain rights according to the civil law and the religious law of the land, he said if other religions have the right to religious courts, we too have the right to a religious court in Israel. And that court never happened because there was a trend in Israel towards secular courts instead of religious courts. And the idea was to take away authority and powers from religious courts. This has been studied very carefully by the hands of the cause. There are documents about this explaining why it is not possible. Lawyers were consulted, and their view was that it was not possible. Circumstances did not permit the establishment of a court in Israel. Maybe in the future this can yet take place. We don't know. The next one is the codification of the laws and ordinances of the Kitab-e-Aqdas. As you know, Shoghi Effendi himself worked on this. And when he passed away, Shoghi Effendi passed on to the Universal House of Justice a large package of notes that Shoghi Effendi had been working on. And these notes formed the basis of the present synopsis and codification of the Kitab-e-Aqdas that was published. And I can assure you that almost 95% of that book, the synopsis part of it, was the work of Shoghi Effendi. But he could not complete it. And the House of Justice worked on it, and it was, thank God, completed and published. The next is the establishment of 6 national Baha'i courts in 6 countries of the Middle East. He named them Tehran, Cairo, Baghdad, New Delhi, Karachi, Kabul. None of these were possible. For the same reason, or maybe for other reasons because of the circumstances in those countries where they were ultra-orthodox in their attitudes and fundamentalist in their attitudes. So it was not possible, however much these national assemblies tried. Although we were able, for example, in Pakistan, to have the Baha'i marriage certificate recognized, which is part of the work of a Baha'i court. So things like this were achieved. Likewise, in New Delhi, it was possible to have some kind of a recognition for the Baha'i marriage certificate. So the next one was the extension of the international Baha'i endowments in the Holy Land. Shoghi Effendi, as you know, acquired a lot of property during those 4 years, both in Baji and in Haifa on Mount Carmel. And it is now, for example, on these properties on Mount Carmel that we are now building the Ark. Had he not acquired these properties, we would not be able to work on the Ark and the terraces as we are doing now. The next is the construction of the International Baha'i Archives building. And those who are familiar with the history of this building know very well how difficult it was, the problems that Shoghi Effendi had in erecting this building. But he had the design made by Mason Ramey under his own supervision, and he had it erected, but he could not complete it. And the last few years after Shoghi Effendi's passing, the building was completed, and also all the archives, which were in the 3 rooms to the south of the shrine of the Bab, which 3 rooms housed all the Baha'i archives, the international archives of the faith. Those were transferred to the new building. All this happened during the ministry of the custodians of the faith, the hands of the cause. The next is the construction of the tomb of the wife of the Bab in Shiraz. This is a very sad story, and the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran did their best, but until today it has not been possible to achieve this important goal of the 10-year plan. The next one is the transfer of the remains of the father of Baha'u'llah and the mother and the cousin of the Bab to the Baha'i cemetery in Baghdad. The remains of the father of Baha'u'llah were actually transferred, and they are now in the Baha'i cemetery in Baghdad. But the remains of the mother and the cousin of the Bab have not been still identified, and because of the conditions in Iraq, it's not possible to do anything further, and the problems have been there with us for all these years. So these are among the last wishes of Shoghi Effendi that will have to be carried out in future years. The next is the acquisition of the Garden of Rizwan in Baghdad. That is another goal that has not been achieved. There is a hospital now built on that site, and this will have to be acquired in the future. The Siah Chal in Tehran was acquired, but subsequently confiscated by the Iranian authorities, together with all the other properties and endowments of the faith in that country. The site of the martyrdom of the Bab, that has not been possible. There is also a government building on that site, so that is not possible for the time being. In Tabriz, and the Bab's prison in Chehriq. This fortunately was acquired, but with all the other endowments, this one also was confiscated by the Iranian authorities. So you see, we still have many goals yet to win in the name of Shoghi Effendi. The next is to establish 48 new national spiritual assemblies. All those were established during the 10-year crusade. The next was the acquisition of 49 new Hazirat al-Quds's, and those were acquired. The next is the acquisition of 49 national endowments and framing of national Baha'i constitutions for each of the new national spiritual assemblies. Unfortunately, in some countries, it was not possible to incorporate the National Assembly. For example, in Iran, it was not possible. And likewise, for example, one of the national assemblies Shoghi Effendi had in mind was the National Assembly of the Arabian Peninsula. The NSA was formed, but we could not have any incorporated body there. However, the national constitutions were worked out, and the national assemblies worked with those documents and constitutions for their operation. The next is the incorporation of 51 national spiritual assemblies. That's tied to number 19. As I was just explaining, some of these NSAs could not be incorporated. The next one is the establishment of 6 national publishing trusts, and thank God all of these publishing trusts were established, 2 in America, 2 in Asia, 1 in Africa, and 1 in Europe. The next is the participation of women of Persia in the membership of national and local spiritual assemblies. This was accomplished with flying colors. And immediately the first year that this permission was made effective, there were, I believe, 2 Baha'i women who were elected on the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran. By the way, what is unsaid is that Shoghi Effendi gave the same instruction to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Egypt and the Sudan. And 1 year after the Persians won, the Baha'i women in Persia won their rights, the women of Egypt and the Sudan did the same. Then the next one was the establishment of 7 Israeli branches of national spiritual assemblies. Now this is a very interesting phenomenon, that Shoghi Effendi would establish here certain societies which are today called under Israeli law friendly societies. These associations are formed in Israel according to Israeli law. But instead of calling it, let us say, Baha'i Holding Society, he had it named after each of the national assemblies which were operating at that time. For example, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada in those days, Israel branch. That's how he named it, you see. And a wonderful thing he did was he incorporated one of these friendly societies in the name of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran, Israel branch. Yeah. And Shoghi Effendi used to say, in Iran, the authorities do not recognize us. But in Israel, the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran has been incorporated. And he transferred property in the names of these various associations. And for the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran, that property on top of Panorama Street, immediately overlooking the Shrine of the Bab, that means as you're moving towards the west, it's on the left-hand side. Immediately above the Baha'i properties, there is a piece of land there, which we own, and will be developed under the plan of Mr. Saba. He has registered that, and it is still until today registered in the name of the National Spiritual Assembly of Baha'is of Iran-Israel branch. In the taboo, in the land registry. Okay, the next one is the establishment of a national Baha'i printing press in Tehran. We were not able, this was with the understanding that the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran would be incorporated and it would have its own printing press. It was not possible to do that. But the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran succeeded in having a publishing house which printed Baha'i books, except that we could not print them in a printing press. We had them mimeographed and bound and duplicated, and sold. And many books today in our Baha'i library, if you go there, which were published during that period of the 10-Year Crusade, are there. They're all typed, mimeographed, and bound. It was not an official thing, but it was something on the path to the fulfillment of this shining goal, formulated by the Guardians. The next is the reinforcement of the ties with the United Nations. We already had ties with the United Nations, and Shoghi Effendi wanted this to be reinforced, and this thing happened especially 2 years before he passed away. We had the persecutions in Iran, and the Friends were able to have much closer ties with the UN agencies and Security Council and Human Rights Commission and so on in New York. And Shoghi Effendi had anticipated this, that we should pay attention and develop our relationships with the UN. And this was done. As you know, this process has been going on now, and we have a mighty office in New York, another office in Geneva, and another office in the Pacific, and another office, where else? And so on. Now, my head doesn't work. Opening of 13 unopened republics of the Soviet Union, circumstances permitting. You know, the Soviet Union, according to the 10-Year Crusade, divided into two. One, the European section, and he counted those republics as part of Europe, and the Asian republics, and he counted those as part of Asia. In other words, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, he broke it up himself. And there were 13 unopened republics, and he named them. And he said, circumstances permitting, the French should try to send pioneers there. It turned out, later on, as I will explain when we come to the Knights of Baha'u'llah, that it turned out that there were some Baha'is there that had not been reported previously to Shoghi Effendi, and other territories were opened through traveling teachers who went there. We will discuss that later on. The last one was the convocation of the first Baha'i World Congress in 1963 in Baghdad. Well, it was not possible to have the Congress in Baghdad. It was held in London. And it was so appropriate for it to be in London because Shoghi Effendi had passed away in London. And this brought so many Baha'is to that first Congress, on the one hand, to pay their respects to their guardian who had passed away while laboring for the cause at the midway point of his spiritual crusade, and on the other, in order to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Baha'u'llah. So these were the objectives of the 10-Year Crusade. I'm sure you are tired. Sure. Okay. Now, Shoghi Effendi explained that there were to be 4 phases of the 10-year plan. We'll have to rush this. I only read these things. You'll have to yourself assume. We will all assume that they're clear enough. The first phase, he said, was the opening of the virgin territories, 1 year. And during this year, he named the Knights. Second was the acquisition of national Haziratul Quds and endowments, 2 years. And there was a tremendous effort by the Baha'is all over the world to win these goals. Third, the multiplication of Baha'i localities and 16 new national assemblies to be formed in 2 years, he said. And this was done. And then, just as he passed away, he said the 4th phase, and the hands continued on, plodding on during the 4th phase. We never had another 5th phase. And it was, when you read it, it really covers the rest of the plan. Vast increase in the number of believers and localities, and erection of the temples of Africa, Australasia, and Europe. So, the Knights of Baha'u'llah. Now, the word Knights had been used already by Baha'u'llah in his writings. Abdul Baha also used the word Knights. He also used the word horsemen. But neither Baha'u'llah nor Abdul Baha used the term in the way that Shoghi Effendi did, which was more or less with a capital K. They used it, if you like, with lowercase k. By knights they meant the heroes. And that's how the word was used or translated into English. But Shoghi Effendi took that word and gave it a special meaning. It became an accolade. It became a title. And after announcing the goals of the 10-Year Crusade, on the 28th of May, 1953, this is just about 26 days after Rizwan, suddenly This announcement came from Shoghi Effendi. Planning, inscribe, chronological order, names, spiritual conquerors, illuminated roll of honor, to be deposited, entrance door, inner sanctuary, tomb Baha'u'llah, as permanent memorial, contribution, champions his faith, victorious conclusion, opening campaign, global crusade. First time he used the word roll of honor. It was a new term for us. Holy Year was a new term for us. Crusade was a new term for us. This was another one. Roll of honor. Knights. So Shoghi Effendi wanted, as we just saw, during 1 year, 431 countries and territories of the world to be open to the faith. And here he says, I'm going to open this list and I'm going to inscribe the names in chronological order of those pioneers who will arise and go to these countries, these virgin, these unconquered territories of the globe. This caught the imagination of the Baha'is all over the world. In the course of about a month or so, Shoghi Effendi started explaining what he had in mind. So in letters written on his behalf, he gave these explanations. There are many, but I'll just quote two. He said, there are no objections to more than one pioneer settling in these areas. That means these virgin areas. If the original one, to whom the territory has been assigned, that means the country, the NSA, cannot proceed at this moment, they still will be reaching their goal, even though someone else might reach that point sooner than they. All who proceed to these points at this time will be designated as Knights of Baha'u'llah, and their names carried on the roll of honor to be deposited permanently in the shrine of Baha'u'llah. This was not very clear, so somebody else asked the same question. He again writes, again in a letter on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, all pioneers reaching virgin areas at this time are carried on the honor roll as Knights of Baha'u'llah. In other words, there may be 4 or 5 Knights of Baha'u'llah for one country. The Guardian has been considering how long this period of settlement by the Knights of Baha'u'llah should continue, but has not yet set the date. Up until that time, every individual settling in a virgin area will be carried on the honor roll. So the friends started rushing. They wanted to be on the roll of honor. They wanted to be a Knight of Baha'u'llah. So never mind, there was somebody there before Shoghi Effendi would say, I'm closing the list, let's rush. And many went. So when you examine the roll of honor today, you will see that some of the difficult countries only have 1 solitary knight, and some of the easier countries have 5, 6, 7 knights. Then, again in May 1954, came this ominous announcement. Roll of honor, after lapse of 1 year since launching World Crusade, now closed. He closed it after 1 year, from the time he announced it. So the Roll of Honor really was from May 1953 till May 1954, except for what I'm going to read now. Now closed. Exception, pioneers already left destination. See how kind he was. If somebody was en route, we said, never mind. As well as those first arriving, few remaining virgin territories. This is why in 1990, or 1990, when Mr. and Mrs. Katirai went to the Sakhalin Islands. It was the last unopened territory left from the 10-Year Crusade. They became knights. They set the seal on the Knights of Baha'u'llah, and that was finita la musica. So, now, these are some of the statistics that may be of interest to us. Total number of territories opened by knights, 122. There is a footnote. The footnote says, including Gulf Islands, supplementing Anticosti Island, both in Canada, and then a country. Huh? You heard that, I suppose. Anticosti Island was added in 1956. No. Gulf Island was added in 1956. And then, this including the Gulf Islands and excluding countries opened by other means. You have here, I'll have to speak, right? Never mind. Total number of assigned virgin territories opened by other means. Now, you see, what I'm trying to say, this is the thing I told you that you should remind me that I should tell you. 131 countries were named by Shoghi Effendi, okay? One of them was Anticosti. It was in Canada. The NSA wrote Shoghi Effendi. They said, it is impossible to open Anticosti. No pioneers can go there. It is an island owned by a paper company, entirely controlled by that company. Only those people employed by that company can go there. We have been trying, Baha'is have been trying to seek employment. It doesn't work. The other possibility is for hunters to go there. And the third possibility is for people related to the islanders to go there and settle. And none of these are open to us. What shall we do? Shoghi Effendi said, all right, choose another island. So they consulted and chose Gulf Islands. Shoghi Effendi said, okay. Now what happened was, that they were able to open Anticosti. And Shoghi Effendi named a knight for Anticosti. And it is on the Roll of Honor. When you see it, you'll see it. And because Gulf Islands had already won the honor of being a virgin territory, we thus had an extra territory which produced also a knight. So we ended up with 132 virgin territories. Now, the 122 does not jibe the 122 does not agree with the 132. The reason is that 10, as you see later on, were opened by other means. And I think I also referred to this. In other words, there were some countries that Shoghi Effendi had not yet received reports about, where there were Baha'is. So he himself announced it in one of his Rizwan messages. He said, because of these reports, we consider that these countries are already opened. But because they were already opened and already they were there, these Baha'is could not be named knights. You see? So that reduced the number by 10. And also some of these countries were opened by traveling teachers who could not just reside there. People went back and forth. And that's how people became Baha'is. So that is, and there weren't one person, there were a whole group of people who went at different times. So we had 10 territories like that, and that explains the 122. And as you see, the distribution between Africa, Americas, Asia, and Europe are there. Total number of knights, 257. Men, 131. Women, 126. A pretty good distribution. Total number of knights still alive, 159. And Mr. Ben Gurki is one of them. Who else do we have at the World Center who is a knight? Who? Mr.? Oh, Mrs. Mahajer, yes, that's right. That's right. So, total number living at posts, God bless them, 14. Number settled during Shoghi Effendi's life and still at posts, 10. Total number of assigned virgin territories opened by other means, which I have already explained, 10. Number of knights intending to be present at the centenary, 108. 96 have passed away. All right. Just a few words about this Roll of Honor. The Roll of Honor is on a parchment that Shoghi Effendi himself ordered. He chose it. And he ordered it, he found the artist who would put the names on the Roll of Honor. And it's in the form of spaces for each country, like cartouches for each country, 2 columns. Is it 2 columns or 3 columns? When we see it together, we will see. And the names of the Knights of Baha'u'llah, if there are more than one, they are written in smaller letters, and if it's just one name, he has taken the full space of the cartouche. This Roll of Honor will be displayed when the Knights of Baha'u'llah will be here. They will see it, the original. The next day, it will be placed by Rohia Khanum. It should be already placed in a special box, steel box, and it will be placed at the entrance of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Now, we will all be there, and we'll have the privilege of participating at this very important and momentous occasion, when one of the wishes of Shoghi Effendi would be carried out by the hands of his beloved wife, Rohia Khanum. There will be also a map made in the style of the maps of Shoghi Effendi, showing all the 132 territories, and from each country there is a line, and on that line the name of the knight is written, piercing that country. This was the style envisaged by Shoghi Effendi for that map, and it's in color. That would be displayed too, and a copy will of course be made available to the friends. So, we will call it a day, okay? That's it.
Don't you wish you'd been alive at the time that those messages were being received and the friends were gathering to study them and to get the guidance and the sense of direction for what should be done now? Let's take just a couple of questions. I think we're so filled up with the details and the great panorama of this crusade. So thank you so much, Mr. Nakhjavani. Before we have the closing prayer, I'd like to let everybody know that refreshments will be available downstairs at the conclusion of the program. So now if Delise Brisport Favetti will come and read the prayer.
Divided the countries of the world in two, the virgin territories and the open territories. China was among the open territories.
Any other questions? Florence Conway? May I repeat the question so that the friends downstairs can hear? Mrs. Conway is asking about Shoghi Effendi's reference to the inner sanctuary in the shrine of Baha'u'llah where the roll of honor will be placed.
Shoghi Effendi in his English writings has described the Haram-e-Aqdas in various ways. The holy court, the Haram-e-Aqdas. The outer sanctuary is that little area outside the small gate before you get to the 3 steps. The inner sanctuary is where we stand, including the threshold as you enter. The Holy of Holies is the room where his blessed remains are interred. That's how he describes the shrine of Baha'u'llah. So when he says the inner sanctuary, he means not the outer sanctuary, but just the beginning of the inner sanctuary, because when he sent a picture of the new door, the present door of the shrine of Baha'u'llah to the American NSA, he asked them to describe this door and to say that immediately behind this door the roll of honor will be placed. So there is a difference of just 1 stone.
The question concerns the properties and holy places that had been acquired in Iran in the past, some of which have since been confiscated by the authorities and some of which have now been demolished. And the questioner asks, what will happen in the future to these sites and to these properties?
In the case of, for example, the house of the Bab in Shiraz, it will have to be reconstructed. We have full details of architectural details of the building. There will be no problem at all to rebuild that house. In the case of sites which are not in our possession, and there are other buildings, secular government buildings built on it, undoubtedly we have to have faith and we have to be confident and well assured that the time will come when all these properties will be in the ownership of the Baha'i community and that these secular buildings will be demolished and that the original structures will be built.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nakhjavani.
Right.
Before